Can you talk about faith in your law school applications? And if so, what's the best way to do that? Today, we're going to be talking about incorporating faith, if you so choose, into your law school application process. We're going to talk about some do's, some don'ts, and where it makes the most sense to share that part of your background, your experiences, and your identity. For those of you who are new, my name is Sydney Montgomery, and I'm the founder of Montgomery Admissions Consulting, a brand underneath the Barrier Breakers faith-based nonprofit organization. And we specialize in working with first-generation and minority law school applicants. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because, as I said, we're a faith-based organization. Now, not everyone knows that. And what faith-based means to us is that we believe in serving the whole person. So we believe in meeting all of your needs, not just the transactional nature of working with your essays, but also being there for you if you're having a bad day, if you need a mentor or an encouragement, if you need help finding a healthcare provider, for example, for accommodations. We also provide wraparound support and mentorship and career services throughout your time in law school. And for us, that's very important. We believe in community building and making sure that no one feels alone at any step of the process. But for us, being faith-based is also about being open and tolerant and affirming. And so we serve students of all faith or no faith, and our staff and our law school consultants are of all faiths and sometimes no faith. And that's okay because we want to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at. And we don't discriminate or judge people for whatever their faith beliefs are. This is just a place where there is love and encouragement and a welcoming environment. We know from working with so many different kinds of students that faith is often something that students might want to bring into their law school application process, but they're honestly just not really sure how, or they're not sure if it's the time or the place. And so I wanted to talk about it. I also want to mention that if you are watching this and maybe you're not a law school applicant, but you are a current law school student, or rather you're a lawyer, a professional, and you love the work that we're doing and you want to continue to support us, we are a nonprofit. So we do take donations, and you can always visit us at barrier-breakers.org/donors. So let's talk about incorporating faith into your application process. There are 3 places where it probably makes sense, maybe 4, to talk about faith in your law school application process. There is your personal statement. There is your diversity statement. There is your why us essay. And then that 4th one is kind of your resume. And that really just depends on what you've done and why you're going to law school. I think a lot of times people might overthink this question a little bit. Can I talk about faith in my law school applications? Well, that really depends. Is faith an integral part of why you're going to law school? If you've been following me, if you've been listening to the podcast, the Break Into Law School podcast, first off, if you're not following that podcast, make sure that you do that. Go ahead and like and follow, or like and subscribe to this YouTube channel, because we have a lot of information about your personal statement. And if you've been listening to us talk about personal statements, you know that we always say that your personal statement should convey why it is that you want to go to law school and why now. And ideally, what kind of law you want to practice. Now, I know not all personal statements have to talk about this, but we've been doing this for a long time, and we've got pretty good success rates with students working through their essays, and I can tell you that no one is ever going to be upset receiving a personal statement that tells them why you want to go to law school. Yeah, of course, there are other creative things that you could do in your personal statement. I'm a lawyer. My job is to mitigate risk and to give you the most straightforward advice possible, and explaining to the admissions officer or reader why law school is the next logical step in your career. It will never be a bad decision. Some of you have a very concrete reason why you want to go to law school that is intertwined with your faith. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're really passionate about religious freedom and religious rights, and that issue is what's bringing you to law school. Well, then I think it probably would be okay to talk about your own personal faith and how you've worked in that religious freedom, religious right issue in your law school personal statement, right? So this is our first do. Do talk about faith if it is an integral reason for why you want to practice law. Integral, not like my faith, I'm Christian, right? Not like my faith calls me to be a kind, justice-hearted person. Yes, but also like that could be calling me to go to med school or public policy or be a social worker, right? I'm talking about like I really want to defend the religious liberties and religious rights of X people, or I have experienced this kind of religious discrimination and it has spurred me to law school. I have tried to make these changes outside of the law, but realized that I can affect the most change by going to law school and working and getting experience in this area. You might be like, Sydney, that's very specific. Yes, because if you're going to talk about faith in your personal statement, ideally it is tied to why you want to go to law school and maybe what area of law you want to practice. Now, there are a lot of tangential things here. Like perhaps you're really interested in going into child advocacy and you've done a lot of work at your church with children or with battered women and children. You can mention that you did that work at your church, right? That's completely fine. I wouldn't even consider that talking about faith in your personal statement, because that's the context to the story, an anecdote that is again relating to the area of law that you want to practice. I think sometimes people get very scared. They're like, oh, I can't mention church, I can't mention my synagogue, I can't mention my mosque. Like, you absolutely can if it's integral to a story or an anecdote that is furthering you telling me why you want to practice a certain area of law or why you want to go to law school. I'm going to give you my first don't, though. Do not preach at the admissions committee. I have seen this done before. It is not pretty. As I mentioned, I am a Christian. However, I am not, and I did not, and I would never recommend someone to write a sermon in their personal statement. What do I mean by that? The same way that I always say the personal statement is not a place to center an issue. So for example, if you are very passionate about gun rights or gun control, your personal statement is not the place for you to argue why there should be more gun control or why we should have more gun rights. Like, that is not the place. If you want to go to law school to fight for more gun rights or fight for more gun control, you should ideally have 2 or 3 stories that show me what you've been doing in that area, or how you've come to develop that passion and why law school is the next logical step, without arguing and trying to convince me as the admissions reader to get on your side about a particular issue. I have read tons of fantastic personal statements about issues that I personally do not agree with. And that's okay, because the way that you write your personal statement should not be an argument or a persuasive paper for a specific topic. It should be things in your life. I cannot argue with the experiences that you have had in your life. However, when you start trying to give me arguments, oh, people should really do this, and the problem with America today is that right now you've gone into opinions, which is not really your personal experience. And now as an admissions reader, I am subconsciously agreeing or disagreeing with your opinions. And that is missing the point a little bit of your law school personal statement. And so I give this gun control or gun rights example because the same thing goes with bringing faith into your personal statement. Let's say you are very passionate about religious rights or religious freedoms. It is still not the place to persuasively try to convince an admissions reader of your side in an issue, right? And there are a lot of dicey religious issues, but the personal statement is not the place to have that kind of debate. It's also not the place to evangelize. It's not the place to try to convert the admissions reader to whatever religion that you have, or to give a sermon, or to quote scripture. In fact, you should have no quotes in your personal statement whatsoever. Don't quote Muhammad Ali, don't quote Gandhi, don't quote scripture, right? Don't quote anybody. It should really just be your anecdotes and your lived experience. But I think oftentimes people get concerned about bringing faith into their personal statements, but they're not thinking really about the particular stories that they want to tell. They're thinking about the topic of faith. And if you're bringing faith into your personal statement, it's really not about the topic or the tenets of your faith. It's really about those anecdotes that help me understand who you are more, that help me understand why law school is the next logical step in your journey. So that's a really important distinction. And if you need help with that, we are here. We are happy to help you through that, but that's a really important distinction. The second place where you can bring religion and faith into your law school applications is your diversity statement. And I have read some of the most beautiful diversity statements that are about faith, or the intersection of faith and identity. For example, oftentimes the intersection of faith and being LGBTQ produces a really moving diversity statements, or being from a unique faith culture or background, or choosing to walk away from a faith culture or background, and how that gave you a different perspective on the world that would be a value add in a law school community. The question usually in a diversity statement, which may change in the next coming months, but usually it's how have your diverse experiences shaped who you are and given you a different perspective that would contribute to the law school community. And so you want to make sure you're always answering the question, right? You want to share that experience in one or two narrative anecdotes. And yes, absolutely, it can be about faith, but it also can be something that elicits and shows a perspective that you have. I'll tell you myself, my diversity statement did center on my faith, and it actually centered on a time when I realized that I didn't fully agree with everything that my church had said or taught me. And I realized that the world was significantly more nuanced. There were many more shades of gray than the black and white that I had been taught growing up. That was important for me. And there was an incident and a moment and a trigger that I talked about in my diversity statement. And it was a time when I learned to think for myself. And it was a time that I expanded my own perspective and my own worldview, and learned that things weren't so neatly in boxes. And it changed how I interacted with others. It changed how I saw situations, people outside of my church, in my church. How I moved through the world was different because of that experience, because I had to really reconcile my faith with an event that had happened. So it was about my faith, but at the same time, it wasn't, right? It was about my experience in church, and it was about my own personal set of beliefs and concept of my personal faith and how I redefined that and how I worked through that. But it wasn't, let me tell you about this man named Jesus and how he's come to save our sins, right? That was not my diversity statement, but it was deeply centered in faith. It was an experience that didn't need to convince anyone to believe anything. It was an experience that showed who I was and my growth. I was quite young when I applied to law school. I was 20 when I applied to law school, but it showed my maturity and my ability to, again, think for myself and depart from some things that I had been taught to make my own reasoned judgment, which is what you need to do as a lawyer anyways. That is what was the crux of my diversity statement. I have read, like I said, many, many, many beautiful diversity statements that talk about faith. And it might be about gender and faith. And it might be things that you agree with or things that you don't agree with, right? Beautiful stories of courage, people speaking up, people leaving faith and coming back to it, and what that experience was like, people finding faith for the first time, and how that shaped their perspective. There's so many things that you can talk about with faith. Reclaiming your faith or your heritage or your culture, finding out more, learning more about your background. I think it's really important to think about what is the story that I'm telling and what is the main point? How is the story showing either my growth or my changed perspective or how I treat others? And maybe you're saying, well, I don't have a change, but it is really important to me. You can still show that, right? You could still show how your faith and culture, I think diversity statements are great, especially when they're intersectional, right? So race and faith, or gender and faith, or geography and faith, or family and faith, or work and faith, or anything in faith, right? How those intersect in your life, how you move through the world, how you interact with others because of that, I think can be a very beautiful diversity statement. And that is not crossing any weird boundaries of being persuasive or not, or offending anyone or not. So that is the second place that you can bring faith into your law school applications. The third place that you can bring faith into your law school applications is in that why us essay. And you might be like, well, that's pretty odd, Sydney. I'm not following. So there are some obvious examples. For example, Notre Dame is a Catholic law school. And so perhaps one of the reasons that you're feeling particularly called to Notre Dame, and it's not the only one, is because of its tradition and faith and the atmosphere of being in that space. And you can talk about those things and talk about how important it is to you and how much you're drawn to that, right? That is oh my God, that makes perfect sense. Okay, but what if it's not a Catholic school, right? Okay, what if it's Harvard? Is there a Christian fellowship or a Muslim Students Association or Chabad or Hillel? Is there some faith community that seems interesting to you? Maybe you've never even researched it. I can tell you that Harvard, the Black Graduate Ministries, which was across all graduate schools, was very active. It's actually where I met my boyfriend. We've been together for 5 years. is very influential in my life. Take some time to research those things, and not just research them. Like, don't just like go on the website and be like, you have a Muslim Students Association and I am Muslim, therefore I think your school is a great fit for me. Like, okay, yes, us and probably many other schools. How are we different? So I would say reach out and talk to those students. I'm a big fan of talking to people and relationship building. If you've been here for a while, you know this already. Go on Instagram, or if they have an email, and ask if you could talk to a prospective student about their experience being in that organization, or their experience being a law school student and maintaining their faith. See what they say. See if anything resonates with you. Maybe some of them are like, yeah, I don't know, we're not that active. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And, maybe that doesn't change your opinion of wanting to go to that school, but you're probably not going to write about it. But maybe some of them are like, oh my God, yes, we have weekly Friday night dinners, and we talk about the law and faith, and we, volunteer on Saturdays, and we go to church together on Sundays. I'm making all of this up. But maybe they say all of these things, and you're like, oh my God, I have to be part of this community, right? So then in your Why Us essay, you can talk about, I had such a great conversation with this organization, with so-and-so, and they told me about the Friday night dinners and the Saturday volunteering and the Sunday worship, and to be in a place where I'm supported academically and also spiritually would be everything to me, because I grew up in this environment, that was also really supportive spiritually. And, we also volunteered on Saturdays, making it up, right? And so to get to continue this Saturday volunteering tradition that I've been doing through college and also now at law school would just be so meaningful to me, and I know would give me the strength to continue to be the best lawyer that I can, even when things like my first year of law school get difficult. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that is pretty compelling. And in the grand scheme of YS essays, a lot of people are lazy and they just go to the website and they're like, well, you've got this really great crim law clinic and I'm interested in crim law. Thank you. And you're like, okay, thank you for reading the website. But can you imagine if you were to get a why this school essay and you're like, wow, this person actually talked to people at our school. And this sounds like a really genuine reason that's not just on the website. You're going to already stand out because it's so genuine. And also, you're going to actually mean it, hopefully, and you'll have learned a little bit more about the school. And so when you go to actually choosing a law school, you will know a lot more about the communities of support that you will have. I started this by saying I'm really big into community building, and this is important. Like, when you get to law school, you want to find communities that have your back. So, that is something that you could talk about as well. I have had students talk also about meditation and the importance of mindfulness. And there are some law schools that have fantastic programs when it comes to meditation and mindfulness that are deeply rooted or have connections spiritually to different religious practices, right? And so that can also be something that you talk about. If, maybe they don't have a very large Hindu Students Association, but they do have a very big meditation program or club or those sort of things. And so you're able to find some connections there. So there are ways that you can talk about religion in that essay. If it's very important to you, you don't have to. There are a lot of other things to talk about. But if you would like to, there are a lot of ways that you can talk about it in a way that's genuine and authentic and helps them get to know you a little bit more as well. The last place that I mentioned was your resume. And it's not really talking about it because, your resume is your resume. But if you're very involved in your church, or you're very involved in a campus ministry organization at your undergrad, or you've done a lot of volunteer work, especially going back to your personal statement thing, especially if it relates to why you want to go to law school, you should definitely mention it there. And they will be able to see from your resume, oh wow, she's super involved in the Jewish Student Association, or she's super involved in the Catholic Student Association, or whatever it may be. And that's another place where you're not talking about it, but it's mentioned. And you should feel comfortable mentioning those things, especially if that's where a lot of your time is going. Sometimes students are like, I don't have a lot in my resume, but I spend like 5 days a week at church. And I'm like, well, it sounds like you need to put the 5 days a week that you spend on church on your resume, because your resume is a list of how you spend your time at the end of the day. And if that is where you're spending a lot of your time, if that's a really big part of your life, you should feel comfortable also putting it on your resume, especially if you're doing activities that are furthering, like I said, volunteer work or community service or giving back, furthering those values that law schools care about, and also maybe even furthering the development of the passion for why you want to go to law school. Hopefully that was helpful. You should absolutely not feel like you can't talk about faith in your law school application, there are so many ways that you can talk about faith in your law school application if it's important to you, no matter what your faith is, in a way that is just showing who you are, showing your experiences, showing your stories, your anecdotes, in a way that is not going to be offensive or pushy or turn off to anyone, but in a way that's just telling your truth. And admissions officers just want to get to know you. And if faith is an integral part of your identity, you should not feel like you have to hide it. And if you feel like you have to hide it, well, that's a problem, because you shouldn't have to hide any part of your identity in your law school applications. You are awesome, exactly the way that you are, with all of the different parts of your identity, and you are worthy and valuable to a law school, exactly the way that you are, with all of the parts of your identity. You should feel that way in the process. If you want help through the process, we're here at Barrier Breakers. We would love to help you. If you have questions, don't forget you can always submit them to bit.ly/breakinto-law-school. We try to answer those questions at least once a month here on the podcast. If you're not already following the podcast, make sure you're doing that at Break Into Law School, and make sure that you are liking and subscribing and following our YouTube channel. And like I said, if you're interested in supporting our work, you can donate at barrier-breakers.org/donors. I hope this video is helpful. Share it with a friend, and I will see you soon.